Podcasting since 2005. This is the King of Podcasts radio network. kingofpodcasts.com.
What do all those tattoos you wear say about you?
We're all a little depraved and debaucherous. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Welcome to the program. This is King of Podcasts. Welcome you to another episode. We're going to talk about tattoos once again because it's the story that never wants to go away. 3 years ago, I did an episode, a 10-minute episode. I used to do the series when I first started doing the Praise and Debaucherous. I would do a 30-minute episode during the middle of the week, and I would do a couple of shorter episodes in between. And then I changed to a 30-minute format, and I've been here roughly ever since. Sometimes it go a little longer. But one of the subjects that I rotated in my normal list of topics to bring up on this program were tattoos. Because I noticed that there were, at least what I saw, and this also goes back to studies that I was reading about back then, tattoos and their relation to trauma. Because I noticed when some people, if it's not for cultural or personal significance, for those that want to get tattoos, I feel like sometimes that is like a calling card of someone that has dealt with some various levels of trauma. And I've had studies that I have brought up here on the program to back that up. And so that particular episode, it's gotten quite a few views. But one of the things I got more than anything is that people keep coming across this on my YouTube feed. They keep commenting about it. And I'm looking back at how many times I've gotten comments on this particular episode, but it keeps happening. And there's nothing much else I could do about it, but it's here. So I've gotten a good amount of comments so far, and there have been more since. And every time we have comments that come up, I'm going to bring them up because I'm like, well, this continues to be a subject. So I'll go back to it again. Now, I initially got no particular comments about this video until about 10 months ago, when I started looking back at everything that was here. And maybe it was somebody that was on here that really just started giving, the real commentary, just got really worked up on it. Because the first person that wrote on there was just a phase, saying it's probably best to look at actual studies before making such claims. But I've had a very even-handed set of comments here that agree with me and those that are kind of miffed by the fact that I would bring this up. And then I had someone that came to my defense saying that they had done studies in Germany about the correlation between tattoos and childhood trauma. And there was a research article that was out on there on the internet about this. And I actually was referring to an article at that time to support what I said. And back then, this lady, Emily Jane 888, and I referred back to this where she said that she's beginning of since she was 14. She's now 36. And she started asking herself, why did I start doing this? I love tattoos and tribal cultures that have body modifications. However, I did find out what happened to me when I was a kid. I was neglected and there was sexual abuse amongst other trauma. So she makes my point. She's the one example. But she will feel deeply that she will always enjoy her tattoos. They are symbols of strength and overcoming the painful things that happened in my life. I also think they may even aid in strengthening the vagus nerve. More studies on people with tattoos and childhood trauma would be very interesting. So, Emily, I've continued to talk about this. I have not let this go. And then another month later, Rod B1T writes and says, tattoos equal high body count. I love the fact that these 304s are self-identifying. Of course, if it's a man with a relationship is with the tattooed, then they at least know what they're getting. And then there was a response to that comment a month ago. I have not brought this one up yet. Daryl Elkins 681 writes, high body count can also be first, then the tats later. I know a girl that did this in that order. Tats all down the legs. I never saw this coming. She did it at a much older age than most would, in her 50s. I think when the attention runs low, reducing the amount of hookups, some turn to the tramp stamp to point out the easy layup. Now, could be a bit shallow. A lot of people could think if they heard read that comment right there. Another person just recently writing this in the last day or so ALRR 2000 writes, ink equals trauma, red flag. Mental-ish, red flag. High body count, red flag. Toxic, red flag. Drugs, red flag. Run, exclamation point, red flag. We move forward. And then somebody wrote here, Deborah Shed Slighton 1427 writes, there is nothing normal about it, fool, and you know that. People has been desensitized to it. That simple. Just like the violence on TV these days is not normal. And then a few months later, one is Tattoo Lovers Unite, Tattoo Haters Just Stay Quiet, Keeps the Peace. This is from Rich Sherman 3673. And then FFRD 111 says, we have to look at them. And this was a response to that comment just about a day ago. Another person writes, self-mutilation. Mass Mr. 1960. The Zeke 011, you have valid points. I won't argue against your findings. And then I had the person that said 2 months ago when I did this episode last time, this person, V. Tomlinson, says this was halfway very informative and halfway one-sided. I think it's more cause versus correlation that you'd need to look into. And then somebody writing after that, the Electric Cheese Productions, saying that I should present hypotheses on the psychological mechanisms responsible for the behavior beyond it being a coping mechanism or a form of expression. So I did go back to that. And then since I did that episode, here are the new comments that were made to this. Omega Wicked writes, yes, sir. JS TIANY writes, tattoos on a woman's scream, I'm an arsehole with an axe to grind, or I'm trying so hard to be someone I am not, so please notice me. That's probably a comment to me they're trying to say of that. And then someone, John's 3106 says, yeah, because guys with tattoos are trying to fly under the radar, please. And then ALRR 20,000 comes back and says 100. Daryl Elkins comes back after writing, 7 months ago or something like that. It is a tramp stamp, and all men should be happy that it's there to let them know upfront what they're getting. Chris Jenkins 9978. It's not trauma, it's narcissism and obsessive control and neediness. Tattoo culture is a cult to belong to. Then someone else writes tramp stamps. And then Warren K. Udols 9098 writes, it's the need to display stupidity. Another person who's not named here, this is especially true of women. Tattoos are warning labels on people, especially women. And a reply back to this is from Kathleen King 47, who writes, tattoos are graffiti, fake tats, henna, ink box, or body mark are bumper stickers, which you could remove. This is all going on. This is within the last month since I did that last episode. Dave Richards, 9141, will never get how trauma equals drawing on yourself. Well, I'm going to try to get some more context of this because we're going to figure out more of this tonight. A few more comments here. Now I love tattoos. Beautiful way of self-expression or just art. As long as it's not for trends and it's done by a good artist, you probably won't agree against it. That's from Lady Ladira Unicorn 007. And there's responses to her where Age of Love writes in and says, sure, like with everything in life, there are good ways to do something and bad ways. Good reasons or not. Good artists and bad ones. Doing something well prepared, well researched, or doing just whatever. Doing things because you think it's beautiful or just because you want others to like you. In that sense, a tattoo is no more than different from anything else in life. The consequences are just a lot more permanent. I think that in the last bit, the trauma argument comes in. If you are confident and mentally stable, you will probably consider all the positives I mentioned because you know, hey, I'm probably going to have to look at this for the rest of my life. But I better make sure this is exactly what I want. Maybe give it a few months before you actually commit to see if you might think about things differently by then. If you have some serious baggage, your self-esteem, your notion of self-worth may not be so prevalent, so you don't invest as much in research and care in your tattoo up to a point that you might not have even considered getting one if you would have actually done so. And yeah, then you are stuck with it, obviously, so I do see a bit of a connection there between trauma and tattoos in some cases. Thank you, Age of Love 1980, for getting my point. Let me get back to this one more time. The trauma argument coming in, if you're confident and mentally stable, you'll consider all the positives, And you could wait if you want to go ahead and make the commitment to put some ink on your body or some additional ink. But there's the part of where Age of Love says, if there's serious baggage, your self-esteem, your self-worth are not so prevalent, and you don't worry about the research, you really don't care about what you're putting on your body, it just happens. I think that makes good sense. A couple more comments here. They're just rolling in here. Okay, another one. Tattoos are disgusting and look like black grease. I pity women who disfigure themselves with ink. Don't wreck your natural appearance. Danville writes this. This is only a day ago. Another person. I judge people who have tats negatively. From FND 111 once again. ALRR 2000 writes, I'm actually glad tattoos are so common now because they stop meaning anything. My experience, I've never met a tattooed woman who didn't carry deep emotional trauma. That doesn't mean everyone with tattoos is healed, but the impulse to permanently mark yourself often comes from unresolved pain, low self-esteem, or a need to feel seen. Some say it's art or storytelling, but in the age of social media, you've got countless ways to express your story without mutilating your body. And people change, your mindset, your beliefs, your identity evolve. A tattoo doesn't. It stays, even if it no longer represents who you are. Personally, when I see a woman with tattoos, it feels like a warning from God or fate telling me to be cautious or walk away. And sooner or later, they always confirm exactly why that warning was there. Now, that everyone's doing it, even the lowest of the low, it's all lost all uniqueness. Clean skin stands out more, and eventually where the trend fades, regret will rise. A tattoo reveals more about someone's judgment than most realize. So that is a great way to kind of segue into what I have tonight. One more thing we have here is from Amore Mortis, who writes, it just looks like that because 90% is traumatized and without body mods, look at things like smoking, drink, drugs, and alcohol, shopping addictions, food addictions, etc., blah, blah, blah. Why be so bothered about a stranger's personal business anyway? Pathetic. So I've gotten the full spectrum of commentary on this here. And it goes back to the story I talked about in July of 2022. Tattoos are more common among those who experience childhood abuse and neglect. Let's move forward to what I have today. A new study that comes out, being published in the Journal of Research and Personality. And this is a study from Michigan State University. The study says that tattoos don't convey accurate impressions of people. So let me go into the journal itself and what they're saying here. So there are various institutions that are part of this research over the year of 2025. Michigan State, University of Michigan, University of Georgia, and the Center for Psychedelic and Conscious Research, and Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Ink and identity perceptions, personality perceptions based on tattoos. And here's what we got from this so far. Some of the bullet points that they have gotten out of this were tattoo related to personality judgments, especially openness to experience. Judgments were consistent across raters, but largely inaccurate overall. Wacky tattoos were weakly, but accurately linked to higher openness. The lens model utilized cues that really reflected actual personality. Descriptions slightly improved consensus, but not judgment accuracy. So let's go into the actual story what they have here. Into the abstract. People with or without tattoos are often judged differently, but previous research often neglects the type of characteristics of tattoos. They surveyed and examined 274 adults. Average age, 25 years old, 24.5. They looked at 71.2% were women and 77.2% were white. And they all had collectively 375 tattoos who agreed to have their tattoos photographed for the study and completed a battery of personality measures. There was consensus about the personalities of people who had a particular tattoo that judges agreed in their perceptions of people with tattoos. The judgments were largely inaccurate with a few exceptions. And those who have tattoos that are considered wacky, they're meant to be very openness to experience and mostly more modestly accurate and attributable to how wacky the tattoo was. So right now, as I said, it's very common. Tattoos right now, some estimates are suggesting that nearly a third of U.S. adults that live have at least one tattoo. Now, a couple of decades ago, early 2000s, the researchers Sturck and Houghton actually said that many individuals associate tattoos with violence, criminality, and mental illness. That's not the case here. This is much more broader than ever it is now. While tattooed individuals may be stigmatized, previous researchers often focus on comparing judgments about people who either have or do not have tattoos. However, several factors likely may have affected how tattooed people are judged. So the content of a tattoo. A person with a tattoo with drug paraphernalia might be thought of differently than someone with a Hello Kitty tattoo. Researchers rarely examine if these characteristics are associated with interpersonal judgments and, by extension, if the judgments are accurate. So we know that for some people, tattoos often carry special meanings, important things about why they got it, about the person who decided to get that tattoo, and endless numbers of reasons why people will get the tattoos. Obviously, you can ask, and people are more than happy to say, well, this is why I got it, and this is what it is. So the judgments of tattooed people depend in part on the content and design of their tattoos? Or how would knowledge of a tattoo's meaning impact people's perceptions of those with them? And then also people having at least some control over how they present themselves to the world, like with the clothes they wear, the body modifications they might make, and any likely particular characteristics that predict why people get tattoos. Now, the tattoos they're showing here do not always communicate those characteristics explicitly, and people harbor all sorts of thoughts and stereotypes about people with tattoos. Now, attitudes with people with tattoos have changed over time because more people are getting them. Pretty clear with that. So the number of people with tattoos have increased dramatically in the recent years, and maybe many people interpret this as a growing acceptance, but the stigma surrounding them still exists, such as people viewing tattooed individuals as more neurotic and less conscientious and agreeable, despite there being little clear support for these or other clear differences between either side, who have ink and not. I'm just reporting for the researchers. This is not coming from me, but I will give commentary here a little bit here in just a moment. But now, they move along in the story here, and that the work might only tell people how tattooed people are judged and differ from non-tattooed people, but the approach was being limited in assuming that people with tattoos are one homogeneous group with the same psychological characteristics. Correct. That we don't want to go ahead and pigeonhole everybody that has tattoos saying they have problems or they're red flags or they're toxic. I would never think that, because I absolutely think there are many people out there that have grown to love, and it's just what they enjoy. And it doesn't have to be where you come from a certain culture, whatever it is. It's just a thing. Like a collection. People want to have it, and they want to have it on them. And it doesn't really matter about that. But you can kind of tell they didn't really say so much about, because in the study they're saying they're looking at the areas of where they try to get the significance of what the tattoos and what they represent and how that you can judge somebody. But I think the real story is, it's not so much about what the characteristics are of the tattoos that are chosen. It's more about how many they're getting, to the point where your natural skin is sleeved, and not just sleeve one arm, both arms, whole body, neck, everything. Because we're getting to the point where a lot of people, they just prefer to go ahead and get as much as they can. And if they can cover their whole body, they will. That is quite excessive. I think the excessiveness of tattoos and people having an addiction possibly to going to get a needle put on them to get another tattoo done and have more to go up there. I mean, there is something to be considered about the fact that they can find plenty of things they want to put on their body. But because this study says right here that there's a normalization of it. The stigmatism's gone. Nobody's really feeling the way they did about tattoos as he used to. But, you can kind of tell certain characteristics about somebody that has tattoos, how many they have, because of this. Number one, when you're trying to get into any profession, if it's a professional place where you have to go and throw on a suit or you have to go on some kind of uniform, and that particular job wants to make sure your tattoos are covered, then the thing is that when you see people that are trying to go and cover up and they have the tattoos, they're just not concealable. there's so many there, you really can't do much of. And to the point where some people, maybe if they're, I don't know, if they feel comfortable to have long sleeve shirts or whatever to cover themselves up, because it's the impression that the employer wants to have, that they don't want to have somebody looking at them and saying, well, look at all these tattoos that you have, and some kind of judgment. Because the customers might have, an ill-advised judgment about that employee, but that doesn't mean the employee's bad inherently. That's the point. So they go on to say that there are many different reasons someone may get a particular tattoo. In turn, tattoos can vary dramatically in their type, style, and content. They decided to go and work on what's called a lens model to make sense and judge the accuracy. A lens model describing how observers discern underlying traits by inspecting elements of their environments. The elements serve as a lens through which observers perceive underlying concepts. So a tattoo with a misspelling could be a lens through which an observer perceived a person's lack of conscientiousness. If people lower in conscientiousness are indeed likely to have more misspellings in their tattoos, observer judgments should converge with the underlying concept, resulting in accuracy. But they're looking at identity claims, symbolic statements intended to reinforce self-views or communicate to others how they would like to be perceived. The other part that's very interesting is they talk about how people can also judge other people based on the behavior in virtual spaces. So like if you see somebody online, for instance, if you're on a dating app and you see an online profile and you see the tattoos in that person, what kind of judgment do you have? It's one of those things that's very curious to me because, on dating profiles, do you see that a lot? I mean, do you ever notice? I always used to see sometimes when I look at women's dating profiles, if they had tattoos, like the initial profile picture they would put up, most likely would not have any tattoos on them. So it was something they didn't want to go ahead and divulge right away. Maybe not on purpose. It might have been just more subconsciously than anything else. But I always noticed that. If there was a woman that I met on a sugar daddy site or dating site and whatever, that first initial picture, you would not see any tattoos on them, but you would see them in subsequent pictures, and you wouldn't know it until later on. And then also, personality judgments are not restricted to laptop stickers and social media profiles. People will also judge someone's personality by looking at their physical appearance. Grumpy or friendly expressions, smiling or not smiling, displaying strong or weak emotions are associated with personality judgments. And there was a study that talked about, that was from Brooke 2009, that people could judge a person's extroversion levels just after 50 milliseconds of exposure to a picture of them. That people will readily use cues about a person to judge their personality and tend to do so quickly and often accurately. So yeah, we have stigmas out there and we have people that judge pretty quickly. But how would people use the content of a person's tattoo to judge their personalities? To have some preconceived notion of who they are. There have been not a lot of studies out there on this, but it stands to reason that people might rely on stereotypes or societal norms, particularly identity-related cues, even if that reliance can lead to inaccurate judgments. All right, for instance, I can't tell you how many times I look at these body cam videos, okay? You know how we always at the show Cops. And I would go and see all these people on TV, tatted up. And they were always certain people that I'd see with tattoos and how they were placed. And knowing that, in those particular cases, these people that are criminals being caught up by law enforcement, their reaction, the way they present themselves, and the kind of condition that they're in that leads them to be arrested or charged with numerous felonies or misdemeanors or whatever, that there's something to be said about that. And that's one of the things where I wonder if police, when they look at someone and they see the amount of tattoos they have, what kind of judgment they have. That would be a great study. If police officers and how they're supposed to judge people. And the same thing goes for, other professionals, judges or first responders. I'd love to know what they think about if they see someone in, again, a blind, controlled study, anonymous people. What would people in those kind of positions, what would they perceive about someone? And of course, there's other sides of the coin. There are people that are also very religious, church-minded. Those coming out of recovery have converted, they changed their lives, they, maybe given themselves to God, and might have all these tattoos they had from a previous life. And, we would have a different thought of them as well. Now, in the participants they had, of the numbers they had in here, 274 adults with tattoos from 18 to 70 years old, predominantly women, predominantly white, 8% black, 8% Latinx, Asian 3%, among others. 52% of these study participants, 52% of their tattoos were somewhat visible. 29.4% were very visible. 17.6% not visible. So this particular sample, they were not necessarily trying to go in and put it out there to be seen, but there might not be there for public eyesight that easily. Most tattoos in this particular study were black or gray, 65.5%, 34.5% color. The most common place for the body of the tattoo, on the body of the tattoo, was a person's arm, 39.1%, side of the body, 13.8%, wrists, 11.5%. That's the part we have from that. In the conclusion, judges were able to glean on a person's openness to experience from their tattoos with modest accuracy, particularly if they were wacky versus serious tattoos. Validity was low, suggesting people that with different tattoos are relatively similar at least. And when they did the study to get the judgments, team showed photos of the people's tattoos to a second group of 30 college students and professors, asking them to judge the bearer's personality solely based on their tattoos. Judges didn't agree with each other regarding what a tattoo said about a person, but judgments really corresponded to the tattoo owner's self-reported personality. So yeah, it's going to be like you predetermine who somebody is with their tattoos on, but that person might just come back around and say, well, you don't know anything about me. And that can happen too. It's a fascinating story. But I think there's a lot more that should be taken. What they also want to look at is behavior towards tattooed people changes based on the judgments they have. The researchers wrote that, for example, women with visible tattoos are less likely to be hired for supervisory positions and are offered a lower salary than peers without visible tattoos. The study says that discrimination based on someone having tattoos is likely never acceptable. However, as we showed, people make different judgments about different types of tattoos, even if personality was rarely related to the types of tattoos people have. Fascinating. But do you see where I'm coming from with this? I wanted to present more evidence that comes in here and says, and remember, and my thing is this, I'm never necessarily hampering at it about people with tattoos, especially when it comes to men. I'm not so concerned about it as much as I am for women. Because my point is this. I mean, I can't say anything for the men that might have suffered trauma in whatever shape or form, if they did. And that's the reason that's their reason why they have tattoos in the first place. But I think it's more important to go and talk about the fact that the women, the young women that decide, okay, you know, when women are perceived for natural beauty, I mean, this is a natural beauty to yourself. I go on the same kind of tirade because I like to see women that are just naturally beautiful, that don't really need that much makeup or at all. I don't know, man. I guess I see a lot of TikTok videos and I see a lot of young, beautiful women across my feed on a regular basis. And it doesn't look like it's just a very small sampling. I don't think so. But a lot of young women, you know, have beauty within them. And, you know, you got to ask yourself, like, what is the reason why we see certain women that will make particular modifications? I never talk about the septum piercings or the other piercings that are being done. But I think there's something to be said about piercings and tattoos that women will go and get at a younger age. And when I see a lot of times, sometimes it's naivete. You know, I talked about 3 years ago about the mall and this particular store that I go past by, I think it's Shock Inc., I think it's called. And when I pass by that store, you know, it's not a surprise to me anymore that I see girls that are, 16, 17 years old, that are with their parents, their mother, father, or usually their mother, and they're with them to go get a tattoo for the first time. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that happen. And that's okay. I mean, listen, you do what you want, but it's like, there's some young, beautiful girls that you want to get to that point yet. Like, is there enough, you know, responsibility or accountability to say, you know what, do you really want to do it to yourself? Because as we said in the comments here, when I read through these, you know, there is a part to be said about if there's issues about low self-esteem or other things. Or going back to ALR 2000, saying the fact that, doesn't mean everyone with tattoos is healed, but the impulse to permanently mark yourself often comes from unresolved pain, low self-esteem, or need to feel seen. And then I go back to Age of Love 1980, and what was brought in there as well, that if you're confident and mentally stable, you will probably consider all the positives mentioned, because I'm probably going to have to look at this for the rest of my life. I mean, because the other thing too is that at the time that a woman decides to go and do this, the question is, they haven't met their future mate. You don't know who they're going to be if there was a decision to get married or a decision to be a mom and have children. It's one of those things where, do you want to have that representing what your past life was? Because you're going to be a different person once you become, in a relationship or married, or you're moving on with your life. Like the adventure part of your life, it's one thing to go ahead and party, have fun, go get laid, whatever. If you get drunk, you do a little bit of you do a little bit of weed, a little bit of whatever. You imbibe in certain things. Okay, so it comes and goes. But tattoos being done during that adventurous time of your life, young ladies, and then it's something that you stick with for the rest of your life. It's a lasting image. It's one thing different than what, say, there's memories, in photographs or other things. But I'm talking about like it's permanent. I mean, sure, you could probably do a removal, but the thing is, that is a major step to go and get that, patch it on your body to be forever if that's what you want. I think it's pretty significant. And I think that everything being said here gives me a pause to say, you know what? We have a conversation we still need to keep going with. But now, all of you that are listening to this program, if you're catching this and you were commenting before or listening to the previous episodes that I've done on tattoos, I hope you will go ahead and set up to talk more about this on the next thread, on this particular episode. Because I want this to be a conversation. I don't want to go and create the complete assumption here that this is where things are and that's the way it is. I want more. And like I said, I did an episode about this, and, I want to know that there's something more to this, and just see if there's anything comes across that is important to say. One person, GQ Inc., put a comment on my last episode saying, another thing is, quote unquote, tattoos are war paint, end quote. They tell a story as just with the Native Americans going into battle or gang tattoos in prisons. So there's a lot still to be said. There's more that goes on here. When people are asking me, what's the psychological evidence? I'm presenting it to you. We're going to talk about it. And there's much more to going to be said. So I hope that people understand where I come from, where I want to continue to keep this conversation going. There's much more to it. And I hope we can continue to talk about this. It's a very interesting subject. But more importantly, I just want, for women out there, if you're going to make that choice, if there's things that happen to you that have taken a toll on you, when you hear other people around you say you're beautiful, and maybe it's not somebody that you really think you really care about because you're just going to say it. Oh, so if it's mother or father, if it's a sister, brother, cousins, aunts, uncles, whatever. The family members are telling you you're beautiful. Well, that's one thing. And everybody's going to just think, well, that's just, they're going to just say that because they love me. That's it, unconditionally. But if there's other men and women out there, for women, if there are men and women out there that just really think you're beautiful and they see you, and then you decide to go ahead and, throw a tattoo on you, it's one thing if it's culturally significant, or if it's some significance of, somebody of a past loved one, whatever it might be. Understood. Never going to go against that part. I'm not going to say that you can't just you need to be completely clean. I don't expect that anymore. I understand that now. But then also at the same time, we see a lot of cultures where that's not even a thing really at all, because it's just, Western society has allowed it. It's not been anywhere. It's not everywhere else around the world, not necessarily. But, the thing is, you don't necessarily have to go ahead and go with the tattoos and leave a permanent mark, because we already know you're still going to be depraved and debaucherous.